Watergate. In 1972, the Democratic headquarters were broken into. Campaign information was stolen the old-fashioned way, with a crowbar. Woodward and Bernstein got the scoop from an anonymous FBI source called Deep Throat and brought down a government.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
Trust in the media was high.
A scene of massive destruction in downtown Manhattan.
In the wake of 9/11, the White House pushed to invade Iraq on suspicions of weapons of mass destruction. Anonymous intelligence sources fed that line to the media, famously to the New York Times, justifying this. But later,
we did not find the weapons of mass destruction that we all believed were there.
Trust in the media suffered. And now, more anonymous sources and a different kind of break-in. During the election campaign, Russian hackers were suspected of leaking thousands of Clinton campaign emails to WikiLeaks.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. I think you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press.
And now, the latest twist. Media reports say sources at the CIA and FBI are certain the hacks were directed by not just Russian hackers, but Putin himself, trying to help Trump win.
News organizations in the United States essentially became the arms of Russian intelligence.
But while Democrats blame the media for being spun by Russia, Trump supporters blame them for being spun by the CIA.
You have multiple people saying different things coming through third parties and media reports.
So, who to trust? For the last Sunday Talk panel of 2016, I'm joined by all four of our regulars. Jonathan Kay is editor-in-chief of Walrus Magazine. Adrian Batra is editor-in-chief of the Toronto Sun. Elamine Abdelmahmoud is social media editor at BuzzFeed Canada. And Stephen Marsh is a culture writer for Esquire. So here we go, a few media stories this year. Here's another one. John, what do you think? Is the media being spun? Was it spun during the campaign, being spun again now, or just doing its job?
I'm not sure you can say it was spun because once information is out there, the media has to report on it. We can't cast moral judgment on where the information comes from once it is in the public sphere. You can't ignore it. People just go to the internet and find it themselves. So to a certain extent, the media has to be amoral when information presents itself, even in a troubling instance like this, when it looks like the Russian government is doing it for its own ends.
What do you think, Elamine?
I don't buy that. I don't buy the idea that information is a thing that is amoral. I think it is not a neutral thing. And think something as simple as going around with all these stories and just saying, we don't know where this information came from, and it clearly is going to advantage one side. Given that disclaimer would have been useful to the public, but I think just presenting the information without context like that was a little bit irresponsible.
Well, the Washington Post, NBC, Stephen, are saying, we know these sources. We can't tell you who they are. We can't provide any actual proof that Putin or anyone else was behind it. But they believe their sources. Is that enough?
Well, I think one thing that's really important to remember is that there's been a seismic shift this election, and the press, the media, what we call the media, like newspapers, television stations, are marginal to culture. Culture is now in Facebook and it is on the online. And what the media are trying to do is trying to barely restrain the flow of information that is coming through these other sources. And so, you know, Facebook, this is the election where Facebook mattered a lot more than the New York Times. And so the idea that the New York Times somehow, you know, was the arm of Russia, no, Facebook was the arm of Russia. The internet was the arm of Russia. The immense access to information that we all have.
But it was the names, I think, the New York Times and NBC and the Washington Post, Adrian, that were saying, we have these anonymous sources. Yeah. We talk to them all the time, and they're telling, they never actually said that there was proof, just that the CIA believed that the Russians were behind this and that Putin may have directed it.
Well, and I would think that at the Washington Post and the New York Times, they would feel quite confident in their sources. But as we know, in the journalism industry, it's trust but verify. And we haven't seen that document from the CIA or the FBI or from any of the other 15 securities agencies say this is what we believe has happened. But I think what we've seen over the course of this presidential election is that holes have been poked in the confidence and trust in the media in general. This, whether you believe it or not, whether you believe that Russia did play a role in the presidential election to go in and get John Podesta's emails and embarrass Hillary Clinton, it's still puts a bit of a dark mark on the media in general. I think that there's just a distrust, regardless of how you feel about this, because there is allegations, there's some suggestion that they also had the Republican emails as well. So to Elamine's point, you know, you want to figure out who this was supposed to help or to hurt. Why wouldn't they then have also issued or released the Republican emails? But maybe there is some truth to the fact that they wanted Trump to win. But in the minds of Americans, they have a hard time thinking that how could they get into my little voting machine and actually hack it? It's far beyond that.
Well, I don't think they're alleging that.
No,
but
but they're thinking that's a possibility.
There's two levels of distrust, because there's distrust at the mainstream media, but there's also distrust at the government, because if you've got the FBI and the CIA, who a lot of people don't trust, leaking information to the New York Times and the Washington Post, which a lot of people don't trust. So it's two levels, and a lot of this goes back to the Bush administration, because the reason the intelligence was so bad in regard to the Iraq War and the weapons of mass destruction was because you had Dick Cheney telling people in the intelligence establishment, go find me information that confirms what I already believe. And once you've politicized intelligence agencies, to a certain extent, people are correct not to believe what they say.
But if it's true, Stephen, you want to get the information out there.
Well, I don't think we should have journalists even thinking about what the consequences of the information they send out would be.
Really?
Well, because they're not smart enough to figure out what those consequences are. Nobody is, right? Like no one actually knows what the impact of a story will be. Like that's for the market to decide. That's for people to decide.
I mean, I don't think that's entirely true, right? In particular in this situation, like we knew exactly the kind of consequences that would happen from the constant coverage of the leaks. The Podesta email.
We did not know. You told me that Hillary was going to win. Okay, well, you told me that a week before, right?
I did tell you that.
I think a lot of people said that.
A sharper example, in the case of WikiLeaks, for instance, one of their original dumps contained information that compromised American sources in Afghanistan.
That's right.
Naming, identifying details of people and basically risking their life. That's the sort of information that we know exactly what the outcome is that going to be. So surely in that case, you would have objected to WikiLeaks giving the name.
I'm not on the side of WikiLeaks at all. But on the side of these emails come out and the media has to decide, well, who does this benefit? Should we publish this because there's the Republican emails? We shouldn't publish this because the Republican emails haven't been found? I mean, we're just not smart enough to figure that out.
It's not a matter of actually deciding whether we should publish it or not. Of course you should publish it. Like any editor who would not go with this, I think is making definitely like a misjudgment there. However, there's proper context that's just necessary to actually understand the information that's happening.
You're talking about WikiLeaks.
That's right. And where it came from, as opposed to just entirely blanketing every front page with saying like this was what was in the emails, which I think was a little bit irresponsible.
It's interesting though, because people are mad. A lot of journalists are mad at WikiLeaks for playing a certain role in this battle. But at least there you could see the emails. Here, it's secondhand, thirdhand. We're being told that senior officials within the intelligence service are saying these things. Like how different is that?
Well, I think just on the first point, I think a lot of journalists are upset about how the result of the election because Hillary Clinton lost. But on the other point, there is that big question mark whether or not any one of these 17 securities agencies, intelligence agencies, would actually come out and say we've heard that they are confident. We've heard that language has existed before, weapons of mass destruction. We've heard that, but the intelligence agencies have politicized themselves. To Jonathan's point earlier, I think it started way before George W.'s presidency. They injected themselves into this election as well. So trust and confidence in themselves is questionable, and they are government employees, even though they understand their duty and their responsibility, and we in the media, I think, understand our moral obligation. If we are going to come forward with a story that has potential national security implication, I've heard from the government of Canada, if we ask for a confirmation or something, they've asked us, no, please do not until we get these ducks in a row. So there's always consideration when we are talking about these sorts of things. So yes, I do think we can handle it and figure it out.
Did you want in, Stephen?
Well, I just think this is a conversation from the past because, the truth is that this current election, the minor ethical decisions made at the New York Times or NBC or Washington Post are one thing, but, the American people decided that they'd rather have news from Macedonian teenagers who tell them that Hillary Clinton is a demon. Right, which was literally believed by a significant portion of the American public. I think a lot of times people blame the media just because they cannot stomach actually blaming people. I think there's this idea that the media is there to spoon feed information to these childlike public. if you're going to believe that Hillary Clinton's a demon, like that's not the media's fault.
But that's not to say we don't have any power in this situation to present information as accurately as possible.
We're totally marginal to the culture.
But that's a different argument. I mean, to me, what's at stake here is that we're being told that this is being compared to an act of war. The Russians declaring war,
Yes.
trying to seize control of who's going to be in the White House. So you're the editor-in-chief of a magazine, so you have trusted sources at the CIA. They come to you and they say, I can't give you any documents, but believe me, we've seen these things and we believe this. You need to get the word out there. You wouldn't go with that?
Myself, you know, I think I would take it with a grain of salt because of the politicization we're talking about. This exact question was put to Dana Priest of the Washington Post on National Public Radio recently. And the host of the show, they were looking for a hard and fast answer. When do you run with the story? When do you not? She couldn't give a scientific answer because she says it depends on a lot of things. And a lot of it's just a gut check. Do I believe, is this credible? Is it motivated by political considerations? Is this a source that has been correct before? Have I been burned by this source before? It's an art, not a science. I agree with Stephen that gone are the days when 100% of people will be swayed depending on the quality of the evidence. Although I still think there's like 20 or 30 or 40% of even the American post-Trump population that still does believe in evidence-based news reporting.
I think that's what we're dealing with. We're like fighting over the 30%, but the real issue is that 70% of people will just believe whatever they feel like believing.
So back to the media trustability here, is that even a word? Trustworthiness. I mean, has the media been neutered because of mistakes like weapons of mass destruction, like miscalling the election? Like, have we, mainstream, we've been reporting all of it, have we lost
It certainly
trust?
doesn't help, right? It certainly doesn't help to keep taking these hits. But I think the most that we can do is just show up in the morning and do the best possible work that we can do with the information that we have. And sometimes that information is really politicized or that information is entirely false. But the most that we can do is say, like, we did all that we can do with this information. And if somebody comes to you from the CIA, presumably you would say, this person knows what they're talking about. And so you would probably run it and say, this is what they've told us.
Well, we're out of time. There's so much more to talk about, but things have changed a bit since Watergate. Thank you very much.
Thank you.